Welcome to Mind Over Splatter. We're back. We're finally doing it. We're finally doing Japanese giant monsters. Destroy all podcasters. Let's go. I'm Dylan Ferguson, and William O'Donnell is here. Hey, Will.
Hello there, Dylan.
Hello, how are you doing?
I am groggy and psyched.
Nice.
I'm ready for this. I want big monsters in my life.
Yeah, me too. I'm pretty damn stoked for this.
Mm-hmm.
Special guest today, David Annandale, a senior instructor of film and English at the University of Manitoba, and a prolific author, and a fellow kaiju geek like me and Will.
Hello there. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. Are you equally psyched as me and Will?
Oh, completely. I mean, giant monsters are basically responsible for where I am today. If I'm doing the job I am, it's thanks to them. You know, if I'm honest, one in particular.
It's funny that you say that because I'm where I am today because of giant monsters, but only because they chased me out of Japan. and forced me into this new continent. It was too cold for them, so here I stay.
Yeah, I've also been a huge fan of Japanese giant monsters, like since I was a kid, and still today, I still love revisiting these movies so much. I still kind of have a hard time putting my finger on exactly what it is I find so fascinating about them, like what it is about where they're coming from, what they're doing to me while I'm watching them that I find so exciting. So maybe over the course of our discussion tonight, I'll start to get a better idea of what's really going into these movies and what they're really doing that I love so much. So we're talking about kaiju films. That means Japanese giant monsters, guys in rubber suits, tokusatsu, as they say sometimes. Live action movies only, so no anime films. We're only talking about Japanese movies. So if you're a fan of Yongary or Matthew Broderick, you're out of luck. Other than that, any film that has at least one giant monster in it is eligible, as long as it's a live action Japanese movie. There's no limits to what years or what periods are under discussion.
So Gorath would count then?
Yeah, no problem with that.
It's not on my list. I just
okay.
Just throwing that out there.
Okay, great. Yeah, so it's slightly timely because there's an American Godzilla versus Kong movie coming out. The format we're doing top 10 lists. If you've listened to the show before, you might already be familiar with the format. If you haven't, the way we're doing it is that we have each come up with a list of our top 10 favorite all-time kaiju movies. We've kept these lists a secret from one another. And we're going to be revealing them one pick at a time, counting up from 10 to 1 as we go. Yeah, let's jump into it. You guys ready?
You betcha.
Absolutely.
Okay, so number 10, might as well say off the bat, I don't mind revealing that 9 out of the 10 movies on my list are Toho Studios movies. Toho produced the Godzilla series and a number of other standalone movies that could cross over into the Godzilla universe, at least in the classic era. There was kind of a shared universe. A lot of these Toho movies, I think, are genuinely good movies that are well made and have like interesting themes and ideas. My number 10 is not one of those. My number 10 is from Daiei Studios, Gamera versus Jiger. 1970, directed by Noriaki Yuasa, who did most of those classic Gamera movies. Gamera is often thought of as the cheap knockoff Godzilla. And he is. That's fair. But Gamera movies have a charm all their own, and I just had to slide one into my list. I couldn't bear to not have a Gamera movie on my list at all. Gamera vs. Jiger is also known as Gamera vs. Monster X in the English release. The Gamera series definitely went goofier and more kid-friendly earlier and much harder than the Godzilla movies did. You know, we watch a classic Gamera movie, you can expect some annoying kids in high socks and shorts and baseball caps running around. And you could expect monster fights that are just zany, off the wall, and sometimes have a weirdness factor that's almost hallucinatory. They can get absolutely insane, which is why they're fun. Sometimes with a sprinkling of like weirdly punishing violent moments too. The reason why I've picked Jiger in particular over the other classic Gamera movies is that this one just has some moments in it that I can only describe as kaiju body horror. Like the moment where the Jiger monster shoots these little bone spears out of his gross face that pierce each one of Gamera's 4 limbs, preventing him from retracting his limbs and initiating his rocket propulsion. Because Gamera, the giant bipedal tusked fire-breathing turtle, is also rocket propelled, of course.
Naturally.
Yeah, naturally. And there's also a moment where Jiger protrudes from the end of his phallic tail, this bone spear, an image that really reminds me of the dick stinger in Marilyn Chambers' armpit in Cronenberg's Rabid. And then he uses this to stab Gamera and implant his parasitic brood into him. This little sprinkling of uneasy, grotesque violations of Gamera's body, mixed in with the candy-colored wackiness you expect from a classic Gamera movie. That's what puts it over the top for me.
So this is the one, right, where they they combine both the wacky kid stuff and the body horror by doing the Fantastic Voyage riff with the
Yes.
journey through Gamera's body, right?
Yeah. The two kids go in a little submarine and travel into Gamera's body to root out the parasite. It's great stuff.
It's hard to argue how amazing that is. Yes.
Yeah, just had to get a Gamera film in there. So, Will, what do you have as number 10?
For my number 10, this position jockeyed so much, and a
Yeah.
lot of films got knocked out, which I'm sure I'll bring up at some point. But in final, I went with Godzilla versus Megalon.
Oh, nice.
Ooh.
That one I threw into my number 10 because I realized, as much as there's some really great true horror to a lot of these films, I love me some camp.
Mhm.
And just seeing like Godzilla enter the fray, literally doing the swagger of a pro wrestler, like shaking his arms, getting psyched up, preparing for this, shaking hands with Jet Jaguar. Just the whole idea of Jet Jaguar, how this film had origins in a children's contest to design a character, and that culminated into this film. I don't have time to go through it all, but it's fantastic that that was part of the inspiration for this. It has a lot of magical moments. It has the now infamous tail riding drop kick that has been thoroughly memed. It's like basically pro wrestling. The fighting is great
Yeah.
in it. The wackiness, like right off the bat, where the kid is in a sort of this nonsense contraption on a lake, it creates this very odd, specific sense of panic for the audience where like, oh no, he's trapped. It's like, yes, he's trapped because this recreational vehicle of ducks that he's riding has trapped him in this horrible situation that he might get eaten. That's very, very, very niche type of insanity is something you only find in these kind of films, where situations like that just are, they come out of the impossible, they dwell in the impossible, and they thrive in the impossible.
And Megalon's a pretty awesome looking monster.
That's true. And we get a bonus. It's almost like there's like a hidden surprise monster in there because
Gigan
shows up and like, well, they both have their like built-in weapons into their limbs.
Yeah, at this point, we're getting more into kind of Ultraman-esque hybrid cyborgian monsters that can have buzzsaws and drills built into their bodies and shit.
They do seem to be kind of far more threatening versions of the Super Sentai kind of villains that you would see in those kind of series. You're very right, like Ultra Q or Battle Fever J. Even amongst those, these ones really stand out.
I can remember this film's theatrical release, and the poster in it blew my young mind. It showed this was in the wake of the Dino De Laurentiis King Kong remake, and so the poster shows Godzilla and Megalon on the Twin Towers, each on one of the towers, battling it out. And
very misleadingly.
Yeah, very misleading. But I wanted to see this so badly, and it played for about a week, and I didn't get to see it until much, much later. Hard to know if I would have been disappointed or if I wouldn't have cared because just Godzilla. But that poster sure drew me back in the day.
In my research of it, I saw that poster alone was credited for like thousands in box office in the US. Like you see that and you're like, okay, well, I got to see where this goes.
We can see that it worked.
Yeah.
So, David, I understand that's your list. You didn't really put it in any particular order. Is that right?
I'm constitutionally incapable of doing top 10 lists. I tend to do sort of like, okay, number one, and then others. So it's going to be more or less in random order, but I'm going to start with number 10 with a Gamera film myself.
Nice.
In this instance, 1965's Gamera the Invincible. And what you were saying about how they skewed towards kids much earlier than the Godzilla films did, and had that strange mix, though, of the kid-friendly and the violent. And it's already there in the first one, even though it's the least kid-oriented of the bunch. There's that annoying kid, the turtle obsessed kid who wants to be Gamera's friend, and Gamera is his friend. But we also have cities reduced to seas of fire, and the annoying teens doing the dancing to the Gamera song who don't want to evacuate, and so they all get crushed to death when the building collapses, and you have to love that, right? So, and then our kid trying to save Gamera and waving goodbye, see you again, Gamera. So even though Gamera's killed thousands upon thousands of people over the course of the film, hey, he's a turtle, so he's cute. I remember my brother and I, when we were much younger, we would rank the quality of a kaiju film based on how much real estate was destroyed. I mean, if there was a lot of destruction, if there was a lot of city destruction, then it was up there. If it was mostly
Yeah.
battles in the countryside, okay. But Gamera had a nice sort of gritty black and white look, and there's tons of buildings falling down. So thumbs up.
Important to have a lot of good miniature destruction for a quality kaiju film, for sure. I'm going to move on to number 9, if that's all right. Before I do this, I just want to introduce a little bit of terminology for people who aren't big kaiju fans, because we are going to be talking about a lot of Godzilla movies, surely, tonight. There are 29 live-action Japanese Godzilla movies, and they can be divided into periods, and fans usually use this terminology that comes from dividing Japanese history into periods based on who was emperor at the time. The first 15 Godzilla movies between 54 and 75 are often called the Showa series, SHOWA. I'm not talking about the Holocaust. And then there's the rebooted series from 84 to 95, which is the Heisei series. And there's been another 7 movies since then that are mostly reboots. I'm introducing these terms, Showa, Heisei, so we can use them freely throughout the rest of the recording, and because I'm going to talk about a Heisei movie right now at number 9. I really struggled with where to put this one, but it ended up here. Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from 1991, written and directed by Kazuki Mori. This film, I really just like its themes of like Japan's place in the global world and the echoes of World War II, things that you got in some of the earlier Showa Godzilla movies that really came back in a big way here. There was actually some tensions in Japanese-American relations around the time it came out, which led to some people accusing it of being an anti-American movie, which accusation is kind of laughed off usually when you read about it today. But I think to its credit, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah is actually a pretty deeply anti-American movie. So I have to get into the plot a little bit on this one. They introduce a new origin story for Godzilla. They say that he used to be a dinosaur that was living on this island in the South Pacific. During World War II, he saved a group of Japanese soldiers who were under siege by a larger force of Americans, and seemed to die in the process, but turns out he got irradiated and became Godzilla. The plot of the movie involves these visitors from the future coming to present-day Japan, and the 2 leaders of these people from the future are conspicuously American, and they convince the Japanese that what they have to do to save Japan from Godzilla is to travel back in time and get rid of the dinosaur that saved these soldiers. And many of these soldiers notably would go on to become these kind of important industrialists in Japan's resurgence in the 1980s, though they made a point of never talking about the monster that saved them. So it really seems to be implied that the proto-Godzilla dinosaur that saved them kind of represents this force of Japanese nationalism that they're not supposed to address anymore. So the visitors from the future convince them to edit this out of their own history. And it turns out these Americans from the future had a nefarious agenda. They wanted Japan to be vulnerable so that it could be ravaged by their monster, King Ghidorah, who's kind of like this rapacious 3-headed force of the new American-led global capitalist order. Godzilla beats King Ghidorah, and then one of the Japanese from the future defects to help them revive King Ghidorah as Mecha King Ghidorah. So there's a fusion of this new global capitalist order with technology that can now be piloted by a Japanese, kind of a fantasy of a new Japanese-led future. But the opponent that it has to defeat now is the resurgent nationalism represented by Godzilla. So I think these themes and ideas are really cool and kind of ambiguous and fun to unpack. Basically, the reason why it's not higher on my list is because there are a lot of just cheap, tawdry sci-fi elements that are poorly staged, lifted from other movies, and often acted really badly by like American performers. If you have a big appetite for indulging in like awkward cringe moments in cheap sci-fi movies, like if you're a Gamera fan, say, that might be a value added for you. If not, you're just going to have to wince through these bad references and jokes to get to the good thematic elements that make versus King Ghidorah one of the most fascinating Godzilla movies for me.
You know, that was very, very close to being on my list. I like it for a lot of the same reasons you just said there, and also the way that Godzilla comes across as this inevitable thing, right? That even when when they try to erase him from the timeline, the result is that he gets another origin, but because there's even more radiation when he is irradiated this time, he's even bigger than before. Where we're continuing the inflation of his size from 50 meters in 54 to 80 meters in 84 to now to 100 meters in that one. And I remember sort of watching that. I was like, okay, he's even bigger now. Awesome.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
This is a good chance for me to bring up one of the films that was actually knocked off my list. It wasn't this one, but early into the stages of it, I was consulting with a friend of mine who is a bona fide addict of these films, and they remarked that their favorite was the preceding film to this, the Biolante
Also
one,
by Kazuki Amori, yeah.
because I did appreciate its crazy, unavoidable 90s-ness. Oh, the humongous, almost completely lifted from Superman's score, especially with the final shots where it's like in space and there's a rose, and the insanity, just how terrifying Biolante looked. But some of these films, like they did have some of those sci-fi tropes that were of its time, and if I'm going to say of its time, I prefer what's happening in the 60s as opposed to what was happening in the 90s. So
Yeah, fair enough. Well, tell us what did make it to your list. What's your
well,
number
it did
9?
make it. I had to have a Gamera film as well,
Yeah.
and by chance picked. I didn't pick any of yours. I went with versus Gaios.
Okay, nice.
It had a lot of the same things that were already brought up hold true for this one. I love the bits of insanity, the strange callousness towards this certain type of destruction. Then it just goes right into like kid fun, including where there's like an early bit where a press man is not quite believing that this kid has a connection and ends up getting killed in the process. And the kid seems entirely okay with this. There's no shock, there's no trauma. They're just psyched to ride Gamera. I also love the shifting of physics, where sometimes his rocket propulsion forces him into a flying disc, like a frisbee motion, and other times when a kid's riding him, he can completely fly level, head first. The kid is not being whirled around like in a carnival ride and being spun off of his back. Like, I love the false blood that they create to attract this vampiric monster who can like regenerate parts of their own body. That whole bit where like losing his foot and regenerating it's kind of cheesy and yet horrifying at the same time. Like, at first you're not sure what they're suggesting when they think like, well, he's only attracted to blood. Well, we need a lot of it. And part of me is wondering, like, so are they just going to start killing people? It's like, we got to lure this monster out, so we got to fill this giant tub full of blood. But sure enough, they come up with a synthetic something or other. It's all fine. It's all nightmarish and would be if it wasn't for the delightful looking monsters.
Very nice. So what do you have next, David?
Well, in spite of everything I just said about ranking kaiju films according to how much urban property damage occurs, my next one has essentially none. And that's a 1970s Yog monster from space,
Ooh.
aka Space Amoeba. This was the very first kaiju film I ever saw. I think I was 7 years old. At this point, I'm not even sure if I had encountered the name of Godzilla yet. I'm a little bit fuzzy on the chronology there, but this just came on TV one Sunday afternoon, and I was mesmerized. I mean, I thought Gizora was just extraordinary, and I mean, I didn't understand a lot of what I was seeing. I just, I always get a little mixed up between the two creatures that, apart from Gizora, is it Camebus?
I think the turtle is called Camebus, if I'm
Yeah,
not mistaken.
okay, so Camebus, yeah. I just thought he was a gigantic ankylosaurus, right? It would be decades before I even hear the term kaiju. This was just the most amazing thing I'd ever seen, and I still love it. Even if it's all taking place on a small island, the sight of Gizora stomping through the village and the climactic battle with the monsters and the volcanic eruptions. Again, it's one of those formative experiences, right? So it
Nice.
stayed with me, and I still love it to death.
I just want to say that I really like the creature design in that movie. Like the crab in particular, I always loved. He has like multiple moving parts on his face and stuff. I just thought the creatures came off really well in that film.
Yeah, they do.
So I'm going to move on to number 8. And I have Godzilla versus Gigan. From 1972. So Will brought up the movie that followed directly on this. We're talking about the movies that were directed by Jun Fukuda here. Jun Fukuda kind of took over as Godzilla's main director from Ishiro Honda in the late 60s and into the early 70s. And he oversaw a period when budgets were shrinking a little bit. The films were getting more kid-friendly and a little stupider. So some of his films can be kind of maligned for that, and some of them deserve it, like Son of Godzilla, which is pretty terrible. Godzilla vs. Gigan is the one Fukuda movie that's on my list. I just had to, like I had to sneak in a Gamera movie, I had to sneak in a Fukuda one. And Gigan's my favorite. One reason is that I really like the pop art production design in this film. The interiors and the outfits that people wear, I think, are super fun. And also, it's just a great movie for monster battles. The four opponents, Godzilla, Anguillus versus Gigan and Ghidorah, just have this epic knockdown, drag-out, prolonged melee that seems to last more than 48 hours as they go through a town and a port and through an exploding oil refinery, through the countryside, over hill and dale, and through a bridge until they end up knocking each other out in a sort of modernist amusement park. So if you just like really fun, funky monster brawls, Godzilla vs. Gigan is a standout for me.
That's a good choice. Great Monster Mash one.
Oh, yeah.
Very true. Like, yeah, the full big fights, as I already hinted at with versus Megalon. I love it when a bunch of them show up. They sometimes in these films, it'll be like, oh, and also this one. It's like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
Now we got
Plus,
even
this
numbers.
is the one, if depending on the version you see, where the monsters talk.
Yeah. They talk in speech bubbles in the original Japanese version.
Yeah, I think the American dub, they actually have these growly voices.
Right. I remember that. That sounds like tape being run backwards or something like, come on, Anguillus. Yeah, it's weird. All right, Will, what do you have at number 8?
All right. I'm going to be going in off of the Godzilla path here. For my next choice, I'm going with War of the Gargantuas.
Ooh.
It jockeyed around on my list a bit, but I do think it's a genuinely good film. It's an interesting film. A younger version of me would have not put it anywhere near the top 10 just because I'm not wild about the design of the monsters. In my adult life, I can appreciate them, but as a kid, I wanted a cool looking lizard with nonsense attached to them and nonsense abilities. Giant Yetis, cool, fine, but wasn't exactly my cup of tea then. But now I can extra appreciate the all the wonderful trombones in the score. Seeing Nick Adams and his controversial life come to light when people get to research these films and they look into the very insane life that he led that rivaled the insanity of some of these films. Like, Godzilla may have had many opponents, but did he possibly make out with James Dean? Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
But Nick Adams probably did. It's got a cool sense of the time. It has a really great connection, like the connection between humans and the monsters is always an important thing in a lot of these, be it, the fear of them or the friendship of them. And this one has a lot of heart to it where you care what happens to the monsters by the end. It's not just a matter of caring about the areas that they might be destroying. They're largely avoiding things. Some of their attacks are either incidental. Of course, there's one evil, or not evil, but there's one more menacing of the monsters, the green one, and then the brown one is the more kindly one. And also that there's a great characterization between the two of them, how one is caring for their brother, like they're caring for each other, and yet they know that they are a yin and a yang. They have this opposite motivation. One is vengeful and wants to wreak havoc, and the other is compassionate and cautious because they know that with their size and their constant growing size that they can't help but cause destruction when they want to get near to those that cared for them in their youth. And they still have this conflict of, like, even after a big fight, the nicer brothers trying to mend their wounds and heal them until finally it culminates to the big climactic battle where enough was enough. They're no longer going to fight humanity. They're going to fight each other to the peril of the both of them. And yeah, there was a certain romantic bit of how, they might be living forever, but at least now they won't harm anyone in the end. It actually had some beauty to it, but also trombones. Great score. A fantastic score. A great score can ride you pretty high, in my opinion, and it brought it into my list.
What do you have, David?
By now, you're probably going to see a bit of a pattern with a lot of my choices. There's there's a sentimental connection to them. The more I was thinking about these films, the more I was sort of thinking about when I saw them, how I saw them, what they meant to me. So coming in at number 8 is Godzilla 1985.
Hmm.
Now, I didn't see the Japanese version, The Return of Godzilla, until actually fairly recently. So this is the adulterated New World release that Roger Corman re-edited, inserted some scenes with Raymond Burr, and changed the dubbing so that it looked like the Soviet submarine commander, who in the original film was desperately trying to prevent an accidental nuclear launch. In the American cut, is deliberately launching a nuclear missile. So there are all sorts of things that are wrong with that cut, but it played in the theaters. It was finally a chance to see Godzilla in the theaters again. The friend that I dragged to it was wondering, what the hell was this? But you know what? There are moments of striking beauty in this film. The one a scene that really stands out for me is Godzilla's attack on the nuclear reactor, which begins shrouded in mist, the ominous pounding of of his feet. This is also the scene where he finally emerges, he finally enters the film. And we begin, and also first with a POV shot from his perspective. This tiny reactor down far below, and then the sudden reveal. It's beautiful. Also, the context in which I saw it is a treasured memory. I think I was probably the one of the only adults not accompanied by a child at that screening. There were two boys, I think, I'm going to guess they were about 8 or 9 years old, who were just, calling out, "Hi, Godzilla," when he showed up, and that was delightful. And there was a little girl who was considerably younger. I don't know, she could have been 4. This might have been her very first movie. She was so small that she was invisible beneath the back of the seat. There was just this tiny little voice that twice called out, "This scares me." Once in the opening of the film, when the rather gruesome discovery of the sailor killed by the kind of trilobite parasite thing, and then when Godzilla arrives in Tokyo and his shadow falls over the crowd and the huge foot comes down on the fleeing masses, that too scared her. So lots of treasured memories associated with that one.
Awesome. So I'm going to go to my number 7. For the first time, but not the last time, I have an Ishiro Honda movie on my list. A lot of the classic Toho movies from the 60s were directed by Ishiro Honda and often written by Shinichi Sekizawa. And that's the case for my number 7. I'm going with Dogora from 1964. So Dogora
Nice.
is a little different. It is a kaiju movie, absolutely, because it has a giant monster, but it's not a guy in a suit. Dogora is some sort of space jellyfish, amorphous, rubbery creature that sometimes it's animated, sometimes it has a little model that was suspended in water, and sometimes it just seems to be colors in the sky that they might have done with paint or something, which is cool. It's different. It's a very different approach. This movie is basically a film noir, which also makes it stand out among the kaiju films of the classic Toho period. It's a film noir in that you've got different groups of thieves and people living at the margins of society and some mysterious investigators tracking them. It really takes place in these seedy seams of society. You mentioned Nick Adams, Will, who's a great American actor in a few of the Toho films. Dogora has another actor that I really like, maybe a little bit less heralded because his biography is less flashy, but Robert Dunham, who I think is awesome in this movie as an investigator. He's got this lanky body and he just kind of slinks around like a cool orangutan. Uh, Dogora, for me, feels like the specter of greed. It eats carbon, and it starts out by stealing diamonds. And then it starts moving on to vacuuming up all the coal in coal plants. So it's slowly moving from taking kind of high value items to just sucking up resources. As all these people in their seedy world are kind of trying to maneuver one another, Dogora seems to loom as this invocation of this rapacious and corrupting world that's resistant to regulation, that's just kind of sucking up all the resources from everyone and threatening the entire world's stability. I think it's a really cool and unique movie.
Great choice.
Deep cut.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, kind of, eh? But
Yeah.
but I've always enjoyed this one, and a lot of it is just because the visuals are different, that the tone is different. It's fun stuff. What do you have, Will, at number 7?
Number 7, I'm gonna skip ahead to a whole other decade here. I'm gonna put in Shin Godzilla. Even now, I'm a little part of me is hating the idea of liking anything Godzilla related that's after the year 2000 or even from the 90s. Like I keep wanting to pull back, go back to closer to black and white or the Technicolor of the 60s. But this one I did I genuinely enjoyed it. I thought it had really neat ideas. I liked the horror aspect of his evolution up to a point. I'll confess I'm probably not popular in this opinion, but I didn't like the ending reveal of his fifth form, his so-called evolution going towards sprouting little human-sized Godzilla creatures. But I do like the awkwardness of when he's first trying to like get onto land and doing the mud skipper thing of just trying to get his bearings. But most of all, I love the brilliant lampooning of bureaucracy in this film. I love that it takes so long for anything to happen, how the panic amongst the humans is them forming committees and having meetings, waiting for, decisions to come from higher ups. People being told, despite this being an absolutely unprecedented disaster and situation, they're still being like, well, all right, don't speak up. You're still a low ranking person here, so don't speak up if you even if you know something. We'll form a different meeting for that. And it takes a long time. It's like 10 minutes into the disaster do they finally get all the information to the prime minister. And I love how they keep trying to underplay what's happening. It's like, okay, well, he can't possibly get on land. It's fine. It's all going to pass through. And then it would cut to him just ravaging all these boats inadvertently. Like he's not even in his fully threatening form. He's just scuttling about, destroying everything. And I was just about in tears laughing about how perfect a lampooning of just how awful politics can be. And it felt extra timely now, seeing how ineffective politicians are in a crisis. And through this whole pandemic we're going through, how just a lot of decisions can be made or things can be said. And it doesn't matter. The thing's going to just run through you. And like you got to take action or else a lot's going to happen. And sure enough, he only got bigger. He only got more dangerous. He got only more cool looking. And the politicians just, they, as try as they might, had as many meetings as possible, only to get blown up in a helicopter. We could all wish to go out that way. Yeah.
I'm kind of ambivalent about Shin Godzilla. I definitely really dig the earlier forms like the Godzilla creature has, because they come up with some really grotesque things. Like when this movie first came out, I watched it with my girlfriend, and she still hasn't forgiven me for the nightmares that she got from those early evolutions. I like the commitment to making him truly scary as fuck. There's definitely like satire of like the reaction to Fukushima and stuff. But I feel like the way that they kind of come together and make things work at the end felt too neat to me, and too much of just credulously parroting kind of Silicon Valley-esque truths about like, I don't know, like if we have horizontal integration, we can disrupt the monster. It just felt a little facile and credulous to me. And I felt that was kind of disappointing for me, coming from Hideaki Anno, who made this movie, who did Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is so deeply cynical and suspicious towards the intentions behind all forms of bureaucracy and governance. And this movie, like, everybody's basically well-intentioned. They're just disorganized, but they get their shit together once they start working in, I don't know, an open office space and have vegan options in the cafeteria or something. So I think that's for me why I can't quite embrace the movie. Though I also acknowledge there are probably like elements of satire of Japanese society and governance that are just zooming over my head at the same time.
Yeah, it's all super valid points, and I think it's just a matter of like, does it strike a chord or not? And for me, it just struck a chord at the time. Just like recently rewatching or checking it out, it just seemed pretty perfect how it's just like the ineffectual politicians, and still they managed to make the situation kind of stupid and boring despite something so exciting happening, and they kept cutting to things that were really exciting. And yeah, it struck a chord.
Yeah, no, good points. Totally. David, what do you have in your seventh position?
I have Shin Godzilla for the same reasons that Will said. I mean, there was the film that showed me, hey, I do need a cross between a kaiju film and Yes Minister. And I like it for all the reasons Will said. Also, I mean, the scenes of destruction are extraordinary. I mean, they're absolutely, sort of goose pimply. and a return to the roots here, really making him frightening, really giving you a sense of what this would mean to have this being attack a city. And I think I take your point, Dylan, about the resolution, but at the same time, I think the film acts as a kind of interesting corrective to the idea of the sort of the hero of, let's say, the Western action film. Whereas here, you've got all the bureaucratic satire of the first couple of acts, but then we also have the people who are not in charge, but who do come together. So I mean, it's a collective solution rather than an individual leader who produced the solution at the end of the film. So I do think it's one of the films that really is interesting. There's a lot to unpack. Even just the discussion that we've had so far on it, I think, points to just how interesting a movie it is. And it's great to see a Godzilla film, in 2016 that's so ambitious, thematically, visually, and that was a gigantic success in Japan, and sweeping the awards. So that's just so great to see.
You guys both make really good points. I'll definitely say that Shin Godzilla is to be way better and more interesting than the previous couple of attempts that Toho made to reboot the franchise by just letting a highly regarded director do whatever the fuck they want with Godzilla. Like, it's better than, I think, the misstep of Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters, All Out Attack. That's a mouthful. Shizuki Kadeko's film from 2001, and definitely way better than Godzilla Final Wars that Ryuho Kitamura made in 2004. Because I think that movie's a fucking atrocity and the worst Godzilla movie, in my opinion. So I hope that's not in either of you guys' list. But coming off of All Out Attack and Final Wars, Shin Godzilla is a huge step forward, I think.
Well, we're on to your 6, I think.
Yes. So my number 6 is one that's already come up, though not officially on our list. It is Godzilla versus Biollante.
Nice.
So the second Heisei movie on my list, also written and directed by Kazuki Omori from 1989, and the best Heisei movie, I think I've decided. I like that it takes place in this dense fog of geopolitical intrigue. It's hard to figure out what's going on. You've got these different countries jockeying, and it feels like both science and some interpersonal relationships are just trapped like flies in this confusing web of geopolitical intrigue. And the monster Biollante, especially in its final form, Will, you already kind of hinted at this, it's an incredible creature. Like, I just think it's super original, super well designed, and very well executed. It comes to life really beautifully and really scary and something totally different and intense. I really dig it. I would have liked to have seen what would happen if these movies kind of continued on that track. Biollante was a bit of a disappointment, which is why when they went back to King Ghidorah, they started reviving the monsters from the Showa series and, brought back Akira Ifukube to do the scores, which was right. The score is a little weird in Biollante, but they started making them more familiar and more kid-friendly, whereas Biollante is, between the original Godzilla and Shin Godzilla, I think it's definitely the most successful attempt at having an adult, serious Godzilla movie. And the idea and the specter of Godzilla looms almost more strongly than the monster itself over everything that happens.
The creature, it's one of the few that still kind of makes me jump back a little bit. It's a terrifying creature.
Yeah, it's kind of a cross between like a crocodile and a squid and an entire mangrove forest.
It's probably the most Lovecraftian of all the Godzilla monsters.
Yeah, very Lovecraftian by way of Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah.
If he had said, "Feed me, Seymour," that only would have made the movie better.
Yeah.
Just because everyone would have to take a long pregnant pause of like, what the fuck was that? The 90s-ness is great. Yeah, the politics, how it's like, I think, what's the killer's name? It's like SSSS9.
Some action scenes with gunfights that are kind of like John Woo light.
Well, yeah, the opening has like this like American action squad, yelling things like, "Let's kick ass, get the hell out of here," or coming into like, just who was the most 90s looking won that fight. And the guy in the trench coat, ponytail, and sunglasses, you couldn't out 90s him.
Yeah, so what's your number 6, Will?
Number 6, a movie that's always exciting to look at. I'm going with Godzilla versus Hedorah.
Ooh.
It has the best opening theme. You can't argue against me on that. That's just scientific fact. It just is. The psychedelic oils moving behind this James Bond-ish kind of ballad. It has a genuinely good message in it, which we've touched on and hinted at a bit, that there's always this ongoing theme right from 1954 onwards where the monsters or something in there is meant to represent something horrible or toxic in society or in our planet. And in this one, it's very literally something toxic. It is pollution come to life. And they were examining this pollution. And at one point, they do just say, if Godzilla saw this, he'd be really mad. And it then cuts immediately to Godzilla just kind of wading in the water, just the only space where he can kind of freely relax, I guess, treating the ocean like his own sauna. And he sees this pollution, sure enough, gets mad about it. And then, of course, from there, we have to go to a nightclub where there's songs being sung by fish-headed psychedelic Japanese rock bands, and there's skeleton backup dancers on screens. It also has a great use of mixed media graphics, like when they're describing Hedorah and it cuts to this animation, but just the psychedelic imagery throughout it that they keep cutting to between like the very competently straight ahead shot like Godzilla moments versus just absolute trippiness, and then animations that are explaining, giving all the exposition. Also, I love that the main child in it is always playing with Godzilla toys. There's like a Godzilla fandom now in the universe here. And like, you know, he's often just kind of seen waiting around like, all right, he's not really a threat now. He seems fine. Kids like him. He's got a lot of toyetic qualities. This is great. But it's magical. And I will also note that Roger Ebert cited this as his favorite Godzilla film. And it actually came out of his thrashing of Godzilla 85, which he really did not care for, apparently.
One person who did not like the movie was Tomoyuki Tanaka, who produced all the Godzilla movies throughout the Showa and Heisei series. Mm-hmm. He was sick and hospitalized while this movie was being made by Yoshimitsu Banno, he said that he ruined Godzilla when he finally saw print and had him blacklisted from directing other Toho movies. He just hated this shit. But I'm a fan, and I think that all your points are great.
That was one that almost made the list for me for all of those reasons. And you know who else hated it, which is another point in its favor, is the Medved brothers, who listed it as one of the 50 worst films of all time. Okay. So, and let's also not forget Godzilla flies.
Yeah, with his atomic breath as propulsion, yeah. All right, David, what do you have at number 6?
1968's Destroy All Monsters.
Nice.
This was another mythical one in my childhood, not because I saw it, but because I didn't see it, but only saw some mouth-watering stills, and then J.D. Lee's serialized it in comic book form in the Manitoban, which my dad would bring back for me, and I would dutifully clip out the strip the 2 times a week that the Manitoban came out. But when I did finally see it, it was hugely enjoyable. I mean, yeah, it's mostly in the countryside, but we do get some city scenes and some different ones too, right? With Godzilla blowing up the UN building, and I think it's Gorosaurus who emerges under the Arc de Triomphe. So, and then just having that many monsters in one place, it's a party.
Yeah, I like there's one shot where Godzilla's trashed in a city, and you have in the background Manda is wrapping around a bridge. Yep. So there's like depth of field in a monster destruction scene, which is something you don't always see.
It made for a nice reminders, like watching that, and it'd be like when they're going through the whole Monster Island roster of how they're living peacefully, and they're going through each of them. And just so you kind of get these like, oh yeah, moments.
Yeah, like Varan doing a bear cameo.
Yeah.
There's a really funny moment in that where they're showing how like, oh, they can just sort of like survive on what they have here, and how Rodan can't get past like the invisible field. But then, but there's plenty of food, and it shows a pond with dolphins in it, and then he swoops in and takes one out. And I couldn't help but laugh because of the whole, like there's that South Park episode about why do they hate dolphins so much? And I saw that. I'm like, okay, well, there's a point, I guess. Why?
The Cove Rodan edition. A lot of fun cameos, including a cameo from Manda, which is a segue to my number 5. I put Atragon at number 5. From 1963, another Honda Sekizawa movie. So Manda is the monster in this, though it's not a huge kaiju movie in the sense that Manda is not the main focus, but there's still a featured kaiju, so it counts, and it's squarely in that classic Toho period. Atragon is more of a undersea sci-fi adventure. This one also has a lot of echoes of the Second World War and questions about Japan's place in the new global order. You have the character Captain Jinguji, I think is his name, who has been developing the super submarine Atragon in secret. And when the lost Mu Empire threatens the world, he's hunted down. He was believed to be dead, but turns out he's not. And he has to be convinced to use his super sub Atragon for the benefit of the United Nations, which he refuses to do because he was building it only for Japan. And eventually he is convinced, and this is the right decision, of course. It's the correct move to relinquish authority to the UN and the global order for the better good of everyone. But I love the final moment in Atragon. It's why it's on my list. The Mu Empire is destroyed except for their empress, who has been saved as a hostage. And she just elects to basically commit suicide, to die with her people, rather than be the last of the Mu left. So she jumps into the water off the boat and swims towards the burning wreckage of the Mu Empire. And the final shot shows Captain Jinguji, who had to be convinced to relinquish his sub, watching this with pain and respect. So it's a very powerful shot because it shows how the right decision was made, but it reveals a conflict or even a regret towards the abandoning of fierce national pride and that sense of meaning and principle that had to be lost in order to surrender to the global order. So I think that kind of complicates the message, and it makes for a strong final shot. Just a painful awareness of something that's been irretrievably lost that adds a layer of depth to what happens in the story. That's why it's on my list.
Very nice choice.
Yeah. So what do you have at number 5, Will?
Number 5, I have the movie that, semi-regrettably, this is the one that usurped Destroy All Monsters on my list. And I put it a bit above, in my opinion. Invasion of the Astro Monster.
Nice.
Just ultimately, I liked the fights better in it. The reason I compared the two is they had that similar plot of the aliens controlling, or aliens are basically invading. Of course, they're just other Japanese people in slightly nicer hats than the Earthlings, or with a cool visor. In this case, I know in Destroy All Monsters it was sort of a shimmering hood. I love that it's introduced in the year 1960X.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's whenever. I don't know. Is it the future? Shrug.
Yeah, if it is, it's the next few years, so whatever.
It has the victory dance that I adore from Godzilla. Watching something like that on TCM, because TCM was airing a whole kaiju theme, and seeing on TCM this, it's shoulder to shoulder with all the William Powell films and Casablanca, and there's Godzilla doing his victory dance, which goes on for a little bit. You'd think it was just like one single leap, like so quick you might forget that it actually happened. No, he does a few of them, and he makes his little sounds to each one. And just right there, I'm like, this is one of my favorite things that my eyes have ever witnessed.
I also love after he does the dance in the American dub, the comptroller of Planet X goes, "A happy moment." I've always loved that.
Yes, that was basically, him transcribing what my heart was feeling. Just like, oh, a happy moment. We get so few in our lifetime, and here is one that we cannot deny. The big suit fighting was great. I thought there was a real great tussle between Hydra and Godzilla, like they're just jumping on top of each other. It wasn't just taking swipes and flying away. There was a lot of actual, fisticuffs going on, lots of jumping around. It's just a really fun movie.
Some good miniature destruction in this one too.
Yeah, great destruction. Both populated area destruction and also the nondescript valleys that they love to use in these films. Also very prolific for some reason in a lot of animes. I guess it's just easier to draw because they're like, you don't have to go to a deserted area. It's not going to affect your budget too much, but I guess you don't have to draw windows anymore. So I don't know. That's a real sidebar. I'm just realizing now. Yeah, Invasion of the Astro Monster. And of course, you have your ultimate villain, like Godzilla's the Joker to his Batman.
David, what do you have?
Well, I have 1996's Attack of Legion. And this is, in some ways, it's almost a cheat / placeholder, because when I look at Shusuke Kaneko's 90s Gamera trilogy, it really does feel like one movie. Trying to pick one over the other, I was going to do it. How do I do that? Or do I have all three of them on this list? Of the three, if I absolutely had to pick one, it'll be this one. But all three of them, I think, were magnificent exercises. And I think this is the one which really starts to push, I think, one of the trilogy's most unorthodox and yet impressive moves, which is to make a 200-foot fire-breathing, jet-propelled turtle a Christ figure. Yeah, I believe this is the one where he dies and rises again on the third day. He gets crucified in the next one, and not to mention the utter annihilation that goes on. And the thing is, I mean, on the one hand, it's like, okay, and I'm saying this somewhat rather flippantly, but the thing is, it kind of works. And it's not done jokingly in the film. And Gamera but at the same time, is also closer to a kind of Old Testament God. I mean, the point that is made over and over in all three films, and definitely in this one, is that Gamera is protecting the Earth. If we happen to get saved at the same time, well, that's awesome. But we're almost irrelevant in the equation, and the collateral damage is pronounced, I think, even more so in The Revenge of Iris, where in Gamera, in taking down some of the Gaios, also kills thousands of people in the process. Yeah. And so making that destructive figure also into this kind of messiah, I think, is we don't talk enough about how subversive that is. And so the monster that was, the Godzilla's poor cousin, suddenly became, in the 90s, the definitive kaiju, with his films outclassing just about everything that was coming out of Toho, was really very striking. And I think that trilogy remains a high watermark in kaiju history.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't have any of the films on my list, but I had a hard time cutting them. I almost had Gamera 3, The Revenge of Iris. That's my favorite of the three. But yeah, that happened in a lull in the Godzilla franchise, right? Because the Godzilla vs. Destroya was 95, and then he was brought back in 99. And in the interim, we had those three Gamera movies that were, and that was kind of when I was first starting to get into kaiju movies too, so I was lapping that up. But Kaneko really created a great visual language too, to show the imposing size and presence of the monsters and the destruction at ground level and stuff that really was outclassing what had been done in the 90s Godzilla movies.
I mean, the fights are so kinetic, so exciting, right? They're the fights that you'd be happy to get in a Marvel superhero film.
Yeah, great choice.
So my number 4 is Will's number 5. It is Invasion of Astro Monster. I've always known it as Godzilla versus Monster Zero. Anyways, that film from 65, another Honda Sekizawa film. And yeah, I agree with everything Will said. I would just also like to point out that I love all the costume design in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Both the Planet X's hilarious, awesome, like silver and black visor outfits, but also just like the variety of jackets and blazers that everybody wears. I think is so cool. I think there's great fashion in this movie, and I think the cast is really strong. Nick Adams is back. Him and Akira Takarada as the two buddy astronauts, I think have really fun chemistry, even though they're acting in different languages. Kubi Mizuno as the like femme fatale from Planet X is great. And it has a really fun plot that's silly, but also has these, echoes of conquest and resistance and personal strength and stuff. And I think it's a standout movie. So what's your number 4, Will?
My number 4, an absolutely controversial choice. No one else likes this film.
Ooh.
No, it's Mothra versus Godzilla 64. Okay. Everyone loves this film. it's one of the least
you got my hopes up. I thought you were going to bust out Godzilla's Revenge or something.
Sadly, no, but I still feel like my number 2 is going to make you guys have to stop and like get a water or something. Like you're going to have to, it's going to knock your socks off. But yeah, Mothra versus Godzilla 64. Anyone who knows these films that might be listening to this is just nodding in agreement. Everyone knows we get to see the twins that sing wonderfully, beautifully. Like it's one of the few times where a recurring song doesn't really get obnoxious. It's just lovely. Every time you hear them, you're like, oh, this is great. And Mothra might be coming too. What a double bonus. This is wonderful. I like that this is happening. The human story functions so well, like amongst the different cultures and the conflicts therein. There's different layers to what is happening. Not just that there is big monsters to be dealt with, but there's politics, societal differences, every single level of it, both like, figuratively and literally. Like, you get closer to the ground level with the humans, it's still incredibly interesting. And then you go skyward to the monsters, and it's just as interesting. There's so many great things happening. The strange arc of Mothra in this film, of like a reviving and but dying and coming back as like the two maggot creatures, whatever, or caterpillars. It's still, I found it reassuring. I would get very sad about the idea of Mothra dying, but I like that basically whatever the next incarnation is, it's just Mothra is sort of immortal in that Mothra will always be reborn. And they will always call that new creature Mothra. Like I think it was in Destroy All Monsters that Mothra never evolves, correct? Like, just remains in the
Yeah,
caterpillar
just
form.
we just get the one
Yeah.
caterpillar in that one.
I think that's great. Like, it's just that as long as that entity keeps, continuing to, die, be reborn, we will always have a Mothra. Yeah, great action, great shots. I love the messages about greed. Like, we have these comeuppance happen to the villains that don't come by way of the monsters, like they do in some of them. It's actual, like, there's like some gunplay, and the one greedy businessman dying bleeding atop a pile of the money, and
Yeah.
great moments throughout. The twins are so wacky and yet taken very seriously. Like, you have that perfect balance of just sci-fi and fantasy nonsense being never questioned in very, very, very serious moments. Brilliant film. Brilliant.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
twins who are played by the Peanuts, the original
Yeah.
Shobijin, who are the best. And
Mm-hmm.
you really hit on the idea that there's so much about greed in this, which always seems to come up in Mothra movies too, the original Mothra film as well, that they're very playfully cynical about all these greedy industrialists and entrepreneurs and just like, capitalism in general, and just all these greedy figures who get their comeuppance are kind of a big theme in seemingly every movie with Mothra, but definitely in a big way in this one.
Yeah, it adds so much more depth there. Like, it makes the humans not just fodder to be
Yeah.
crushed or eaten. You care what happens. Even if the monsters aren't there, what they would do to each other.
My favorite Mothra song is actually the one in Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monsters.
Mm.
That's a fucking banger.
Mm.
But the original one's good too. Yeah, they're all good.
They're all sizzlers. There's
Oh,
no
yeah.
weak song in their catalog.
Yeah, the Shobijin, they always slap. Yeah.
Yeah.
David, what's your number 4?
My number 4 is Final Wars. No, I'm kidding. Though I will throw a shout out that the scene where Godzilla definitively puts Zilla in his place, brief as it is, almost redeems the entire film.
Yeah.
No, but my number 4 is actually Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, two giant monsters all out attack. So
you like this more than the Gamera trilogy?
Well, it's
okay, right. Your order is not a
my order.
order.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
So it's and maybe this morning I do. This afternoon will be the other way around.
Yeah.
But first, anything with Godzilla in it is always going to perhaps get the edge for me. Though I definitely do take the point about in many respects as films, the Gamera films would be superior. Nonetheless, I find it a really interesting Godzilla film. I understand all the reasons for people not liking it and seeing it, like you said, as a misstep. But this is a film that came out at a time when there was considerable controversy in Japan about history textbooks that were downplaying Japanese war crimes in the Second World War. And here comes this film where Godzilla is now reinterpreted as the embodiment of all the victims of Japanese war crimes. And the whole message of if you do not remember history, then you are doomed to repeat it. It's going to come back and bite you in the ass is spelled out pretty explicitly. Godzilla is probably the most frightening here that he would be until Shin Godzilla. The scene where we get the first deployment of his atomic breath, which is first appears as a kind of terrifying reflection in a school window, I think is awe-inspiring, and the move towards then just the screen-filling apocalypse of the final act is the spectacle that the kaiju films can bring to the screen on a truly grand order. So I mean, I totally get the reasons for people not liking it, but it is one that continues to fascinate me, and also points to just how flexible a creation Godzilla is, that he can be reinterpreted in so many ways, so very many different ways, and yet still be recognizably himself. So there is this symbolic and metaphorical flexibility to this godlike creature that can be used in such varied ways and with such precision.
Nice.
Yep. It's a great,
Yeah.
good defense for it. And see, this was one of the films that's clung in my list for a long time and was finally knocked out. You make a great point. I do like how it's the message of it about the whole, the ignoring of history and how it can come back in a vengeful form. It's great that you brought that up, because I was at first kind of tutting the film because it seemed like I wasn't getting the message quite at first, because it seemed like the message was no malarkey, and it was just because it was all just teens that were acting incredibly shitty. They were just being the shittiest of shitty, and then they would get killed, and you're like, well, good, that's fine, that's all. I'm no malarkey.
Get
Like
off my lawn.
Yeah, these damn kids are, they're harassing people, and yeah, they deserve to get caught in that tunnel and everything. Yes, I like that aspect to it. Yeah, the CGI, iffy at times, does have some real great monster moments for sure. I think I am ultimately pushed off my list because sometimes in films like death doesn't always, like, I can't obviously be rattled by every single death in these types of films. I wouldn't be able to watch horror films or monster films at all. But in this one, there seemed to be a certain level of cruelty that started to come in that went past the comical that they were going for. And the crux moment for me was when there was the lady in the hospital who has like the broken leg and the headband, and she's like sees Godzilla's coming by, and she's like, she can't get out of the hospital bed, and then she's like relieved when he goes by, but then the punchline is his tail then hits the building.
Yeah.
And crushes everybody in there. That one went past the whole idea of it being funny to just being, well, that's just kind of cruel. This person, why did they deserve that? Like, I get there's going to be a lot of people, like very few people deserve it in these films, but that they honed in and went in close up to like her like struggle. That was just the one moment where I'm like, I'm not having fun anymore. Now, like, it's all well and good to have a bunch of shitty kids getting killed. And also they kept coming back, and everyone who narrowly escaped him was then killed later. Like, everyone who escaped and was like traumatized or like put in a jail cell, they're muttering about monsters, like, oh no, what's wrong with this person? And then later the jail would just be demolished and just everyone was getting ransacked and killed. That was the part that it just pushed it over the side where I'm like, I'm not having fun anymore. And that's why it left my list.
It certainly, the film varies a lot in tone, but I think that there's an essential darkness to it, and I think that's part of that darkness is what you just described there. And it does have, you notice they see him and they escape, and then they are destroyed. There's part of that's the cyclical idea that the film presents, and of this kind of the relentless tread of history that you don't get away from this.
Yeah, and that's a really great. That's a great point. That's the thing. The theme of it, I really enjoy. It's just shooting it in a certain way. There's a way to shoot those kind of things that, to me, it was honing in on their pain more than it was in the overarching. Like I was less thinking about that, more thinking about like, oh, this really sucks for this person, and I don't like being taken away from that, especially when it is such a valuable message. Like the way that you pointed out, it's incredibly valuable and still very apparent in there. It's never extinguished, but yeah, that's probably just the chord it struck with me. Hit a
So no, it's an interesting discussion and really
Mm-hmm.
well argued, David. I'm going to just move on to number 3. My number 3 is also Mothra versus Godzilla. I'm following in Will's steps again. Just a couple things I wanted to quickly mention. I really like the scenes in the newspaper office in this movie. I think they're really fun and have a great cast of characters. And you've got the one guy whose gag is just that he's always eating an egg. I don't know. He's funny to me. Just the
That's-
dude with the egg.
Yep.
And when you watch a lot of Godzilla movies, you become kind of a connoisseur of Godzilla's entrances. Am I right? And his entrance in
Oh, yeah.
Mothra versus Godzilla is legendary when he bursts
yeah.
out of the earth and then just goes kind of stumbling angrily and clumsily through the town. There's a lot of great monster money shots. So yeah, a great movie, and for all the reasons Will already mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Will, what's your number 3?
Number 3, going with an odd decision here, and this one plays into what David was saying about the personal sentimentality of it. I'm going with Frankenstein Conquers the World.
Ooh,
It's that title alone is worth so many points. That is such a wonderful name for a film. But yeah, it's a Honda film, so we already know we're on the right path. 1965, right in the sweet spot of these kind of films in the 60s. And I did catch it during many of my journeys doing comic conventions across Canada. And I just had these perfect moments where I was in Halifax, already having a great time. Halifax is wonderful. But then each night after whatever type of shenanigans would happen, end up back at the Airbnb with, there was 4 of us staying there, and we would put on, they had TCM On Demand, which I'd never seen anywhere else. And they had this whole catalog of horror films. It was in October. It was right over Halloween weekend. And they put up all these films specifically, and they just hit the right note. They had, like, one night we did all the Blackula films. Just was perfect. We're eating Halifax Donair, which if you haven't had it, you don't realize that it's a religion. It's an experience close to Nirvana. And then they had Frankenstein Conquers the World, as well as War of the Gargantuas, its sequel. It was just pitch perfect. I thought it was a great movie. Every time I've rewatched it, it has a lovely sense of humanity that I mentioned before in War of the Gargantuas, where the Frankenstein, as they were dubbed, they're based out of the actual heart of Frankenstein's monster, and the whole the science of it is interesting. There's a lot of stuff involving the acknowledgement of Japan's connection to Nazi Germany in World War II. But just it has a lot to say about that, acknowledging that dark part of their past, as well as also the victimization of them, of Hiroshima, obviously being the victims of nuclear attack. And from that, you just had this ever potent sense of humanity behind this monster who didn't want to be becoming this destructive force that they were, or being misjudged, and just how they were at first a strange boy, but then they started eating protein, and now they are a kaiju. Then the somewhat late entry of Baragon just starts coming in because we needed something for him to fight. I thought that was magical because we're getting this like really interesting, historically relevant science fiction tale with a lot of heart, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, by the way, there's this monster, so now we got to deal with that. This Baragon's creating all this destruction, and they keep blaming Frankenstein for it. A great film, great direction by Honda, magical title, has a lot of humanity throughout, some really fun monster fights. Baragon is a cool monster. I like their whole burrowing gimmick. Yeah, that's my number 3.
yes.
It's also a very timely and always timely warning about the dangers of the dreaded mountain-dwelling octopus.
That's true. Yeah,
Isn't that just in the American cut that they have that? Am I mistaken about that?
There is an alternate ending to it.
I'm trying to remember which one it has the ending where the octopus, like that's how he meets his demise.
That's in the alternate one, I think, because the original, I think it's just through the Baragon fight, and it's assumed that he's dead, I think, or is he buried? Also, another shout out to Nick Adams, making his way through this film, doing a great job.
Nick Adams and Kumi Mizuno, the same team that we have in Astro Monster. This was, I think, the year before, so their first pairing together. A great pairing. I love them together.
Oh, they're great. Yeah, and they're in Gargantuas as well. And
yeah.
Awesome.
David, what do you have?
My number 3 is Rodan from 1956. Picking up again on going back to the sentimental journey. If Yog Monster from Space was the first kaiju film that I saw, but I didn't really know what this was. Rodan was a couple of years later. By this point, I had my first horror movie book. I knew about the monsters. I knew who Rodan was. And my parents were out one night. I had a babysitter. I couldn't sleep. This was the chiller thriller that came on at midnight, and bless her, she let me stay up and watch it. And it was a treasured experience. And one of the things I love about the film is really how frightening the first act is, right? With those giant bug monsters. That was a pretty cool movie in and of itself, right? And so we've got the giant bug monsters, and then we have Rodan arrive on the scene. And that first act and that opening, and then the cataclysm of the city attack, all of that is just stayed with me. And I think it works on so many levels.
Yeah, it's a great film.
Totally agree. Yeah, that's a great one. That's one that I expected to be on someone's list, because I would love to have it on mine too, but I just felt like it's going to be coming. We're going to acknowledge it. It's great.
Yeah, so we're heading near the our top two here. My number two is one that's already come up. Godzilla versus Hedorah.
Nice.
From 1971. Yeah, I really love this one, largely because of the aesthetics. It's so different. There's a thrilling mix of animation and split screens and montages and projections, and it's just more dynamic and experimental and hallucinatory than any Kaiju film was. The whole scene at the nightclub, Will already mentioned, absolutely kicks ass. I love when Hedorah starts huffing on smokestacks like a bong, and he's just breathing really heavily. Like, he just feels like such a self-loathing addict. I feel like there's this through line in this movie between kind of a self-destructive plague of helpless individualism and our destruction of the earth. Like when the guy's in the nightclub and he seems just strung out and he's staring at his own reflection. And right after that, we cut to Hedorah, who just seems like a self-loathing addict. I think it kicks ass.
Wunderbar.
Will, what's your number two?
Number two, a strange choice that I put on my list immediately. It was number two, no matter what. And I probably have to explain some of the technicalities. It is Toei Spider-Man, the movie.
Okay.
The Japanese Spider-Man series did feature giant monsters every single episode, but they made themselves a movie, and it was released. I did all the research I could. I'm like, does it count? Yes, it does. It was released theatrically. It has a giant monster, the Sea Devil, or Machine Bem, as they always introduce, Machine Bem Sea Devil. Toei Spider-Man, the Japanese Spider-Man series, I've been going through it. It's an absolute gem. It's magnificent. It has next to nothing to do with the actual Spider-Man Marvel series. Like, he is in the suit. He does sort of shoot webs, kind of. He can climb walls. It kind of ends there. He also is a motorcyclist. He has a car, the GP7, that he drives around in, and then can fly arbitrarily into his giant robot, which starts as a Sphinx called Marveler, and then transforms into Leopardon that he uses to fight various giant monsters. And this one was very...
just like Stan Lee imagined.
Yeah, and Stan Lee adored it, as you would. He adores everything, mostly. Like, he's the most positive man that ever graced our earth, but it's licensing run amok. It's an interpretation that only Japan can produce. Also, it's a precursor to a lot of things. Its timeline in the 70s came out before a lot of the other Super Sentai series. The idea of a transforming robot was a new idea. It was the reason that they started adding these giant monsters and robots to what would ultimately be the Power Ranger series. It's like they had Kamen Rider, but then post Spider-Man became the battling warriors versus, robots and giant monsters that we know today. The movie is a faster paced, all the fat trimmed off of it version of the show. It doesn't explain a thing. They don't reiterate his origin story. It comes out in a bit of exposition when this member of Interpol kind of exposes his true identity. It's not a radioactive spider that bit him. It's actually an alien that saved his life by giving him this wristband that put his own DNA into him from the planet Spider, which gave him these powers. It's all magnificent stuff, and it's my number two.
Awesome.
All
I've
right.
never seen it, but I'm definitely going to look it up now. You've sold it.
It's not a very long movie. It's pretty much just slightly longer than an episode, but it went into theaters, so...
All right, David, give us something.
All right, well, my number two has come up before, and it's Mothra versus Godzilla, or under the title, I saw it as Godzilla versus the Thing. This was the first Godzilla movie that I saw. It was also, I got to see it in the theaters. It played at the Highland Theater. My dad drove me across town so that we could see this. We actually got in there half an hour late, so then we sat in to watch the beginning of it again. So I actually got to see it 1.5 times my initial run. Everything that you guys have said about it is true, and why it just has remained one of my favorites. And Godzilla's entrance, I mean, that marked me. And by the time when I saw this, I mean, Godzilla was now an incredibly important figure to me. So going to see this was really, really big deal.
Mm.
And so I'm glad it was one of the best ones that I saw. And that entrance, see, now I should also add that at this time, any pictures that I saw of Godzilla were in black and white, right? Whether this was in Famous Monsters of Filmland or any of a horror movie book. So this was the first time I saw Godzilla in color, and for years afterwards, I thought Godzilla was orange. And I was like, well, why did I think that? And now either it was a really, really, one of those really kind of badly washed out prints where, everything kind of goes pink. But I think it was because of that entrance when he's covered with that dirt, which is kind of a reddish color. Mm-hmm. And I can only think that somehow this stayed in my memory as the wrong color. So I was coloring him orange for some years after that. So formative experience, and everything that you two have said about it for that reason is my number 2.
Well, we've made our way to number 1, and I think by this point, it's safe to say that we all have the same
we
number
can say
1.
It in harmony.
Probably,
yeah. We all know.
Yeah. The original Godzilla, 1954.
Yeah.
I tried to not have it at my number 1 because, I don't want to have the obvious predictable one
Surprise!
at my number 1, but I couldn't talk myself out of it. It was impossible, especially after I rewatched it. I couldn't talk myself out of it. It's just the most powerful kaiju movie. It has to be. The black and white visuals are amazing, especially in the Criterion print that cleaned it up. Mm-hmm. It looks so great. The telegraph office looks so stuffy and sweaty. The island looks so sunny and dusty. You really feel like you're in this world that is still kind of trying to rebuild from World War II and trying to rebuild some sense of stability and structure and comfort, but seems to be not working. The echoes of not just the dropping of the atom bomb, but also much more recent atomic testing that had happened nearby are very, very present in the movie. And there's a bit of a hopelessness to it, though, of course, there still are romantic moments and a moment of heroism at the end. Dr. Serizawa lost an eye in the war, and you have to think that the half of his vision that he lost was the vision for the future. There's something that's been lost there. And also in the visuals, you've got a lot of these screens that show the electrical grid of Tokyo. You often see Godzilla through the wires, through the grid, which creates this impression of a cage, kind of, which is underscored in a scene where they actually do have a bird cage in the foreground. I kind of feel like the cage is like, it's almost a positive cage, but a flimsy one. They're trying to wall themselves in. They're trying to build a structure to protect themselves, but it's inevitably flimsy and not working clearly. I just think it's really a moving invocation of this fragile and tragic world.
Yeah.
Will, how about your take?
Overrated. Needed more Raymond Burr. Where's the Burr?
I do like the Raymond Burr version. Obviously not as much as the original.
One of the best points that stuck with me, and actually this is credit to I'll say Professor Annandale, because this is from one of our classes. You had mentioned just the lack of presence. Like his effects are seen more than Godzilla himself. Like so much of it has to do with the fallout. Because of course, we all know that Godzilla or Gojira is meant to represent this nuclear holocaust. Like it's literally a nuclear powered lizard. And so much of the film is just the fallout of it, the suffering, the hospitalizations, the confused moaning of facing something that's unprecedented and so devastating. And you have no idea how long its effects are going to be. And in so many films after that, I like when they keep making mention of it, even right up to things like the Mouthful movie, Giant Monsters, All Out Attack, Part 2, Electric Boogaloo, all that whole bit. Like even after the hero comes back, he's like, stay away from me. I still got to do like radiation testing. Like this is a real thing. It's dealing with the actual science of it. And of course, introduced in the 50s where, as Dylan mentioned, they're still rebuilding. This is so close to when this happened. And I can't possibly imagine having that type of close proximity to this literally world-shaking event that happened in your country and will affect it forever. children would have been able to, experience it and still be basically children when this film came out.
I think the
It's
closest we can get to that is the fact that Cloverfield came out after 9/11 with
mm,
approximately the same year gap as Godzilla after 1945,
mhm.
and that film is sort of filled with 9/11 imagery. But even then, right?
Yeah, even then, like
That's just a hint
yeah,
of what you're talking about.
the sheer unknowns of it, like the radioactivity, like who knows? Like, is
Mhm.
this part of the planet going to be livable again? We don't know. A weapon was used that no one has used before. It's yeah, it's tragic. It's beautiful. It's I don't know, the song of my heart. I don't know what I'm trying to say here.
Well, you know what? We haven't actually mentioned the name Akira Ifukube yet tonight, who
Mm,
did compose the scores for so many of the classic movies, and his score is so beautiful and haunting
Oh
mhm,
yeah.
in
mhm.
Godzilla. And like in the scenes in the hospital, there are these shots of death and desolation that are really chilling and haunting, and Ifukube's music is a huge part of that.
Yeah, those scenes are stick with me forever.
And like the choir that performs with when we're getting kind of like the funeral service for Tokyo.
Mhm,
I would agree with everything that you two have said. Whenever I teach this film, students are struck by just how dark it is.
mhm,
Right, what a bleak film this is, as well as being beautiful. And there's an article that I often quote that I remember reading back around the time of the Roland Emmerich Godzilla film was released, talking about how the 1954 film is the most joyless of all monster classics,
mm,
and that if an American Godzilla with all of the special effects technology then available were made with the same tone as the 1954 film, it would essentially drop kick the audience into the mouth of hell.
mm.
And a lot of that power is still there in this film. And it's extraordinary to think about, how did we get from that to Godzilla versus Megalon, right? In that tonal shift. And I think, too, just to think about how revolutionary this film was in terms of giant monster movies. I mean, here it comes out in the wake of the obvious immediate wake of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, but with King Kong in the background as well, and certainly invoked explicitly with such scenes as the train attack. But there had never been a monster film where the monster rampage is so devastating, where the city is destroyed completely, where the scenes of aftermath look like newsreel footage of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, that we would get this imagery of total apocalypse. Not just this, the spectacle itself, but the aftermath of it, what it meant, is something that was unprecedented in monster movies then, and to a large degree is still today.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
well put.
yeah,
Incredibly true.
yeah. The unquestioned greatest kaiju movie of all time.
Yeah.
And always will be. I think I cannot possibly think of something
No.
that would have even the historical context, the composition, like, and of course there's, this one did have some films preceding it, but now we have such a vast catalog of tones.
It's one of those before and after films, right? There's before Godzilla and there's after Godzilla. In the
Yeah.
same way that, let's say, the traumatic impact of Psycho is unrepeatable, because every film that tries to do something even remotely like that, yeah, but Psycho was there first. I think it's that same kind of seismic event.
Okay, so we're going to wrap things up here. Very briefly before we do, what are some films that you're surprised didn't come up tonight that we haven't mentioned already? Will, anything?
Yeah, a lot of them seem to make it. Even, yeah, ones that I took off my list, someone else had on their
Yeah.
list. I'd be curious to hear what everyone else had.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I already mentioned Gamera 3, but I mean, we got Gamera 2, so we got to talk about Kanego's
Yeah.
trilogy anyways. Terror of Mechagodzilla was one that I had a hard time cutting, because I like that one.
That was one that I think if I'd seen it more recently, that I was thinking about, but it's just been so long since I've seen it that I couldn't justify putting it on.
That is a good example. Yeah, the Mechagodzilla didn't really come up.
No Mechagodzilla movies at all, surprisingly, yeah. David, anything that you're surprised didn't come up?
No, I think, like Will said, if one of us didn't have it, someone else did. I mean, Mothra is significant in its absence. Otherwise, it seems to me that we covered the waterfront not too badly here.
Yeah, I think so. This was super fun. Will, thanks so much as always.
Oh, of
Let's
course.
do it again soon.
You bet.
And David, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for
This was
having me.
really awesome.
Mhm.
So I mentioned at the start that you're a prolific author. What do you have out there recently?
Well, a couple of things that are out recently with Black Library, for whom I write Warhammer 40,000 and Age of Sigmar books, is my Warhammer horror novel, The Deacon of Wounds. It's a plague novel, so it's topical. Yeah, and with Aconite Books, my most recent book with them is The Harrowing of Doom. It's a Doctor Doom novel, and so that gave me a chance to write about my absolute favorite Marvel character.
Not afraid to say I'm so excited to read that. I've got to make a very special trip to McNally Robinson. I don't know if anyone remembers that jingle, but cannot wait to read that one.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you, David Annandale. Thank you, Will O'Donnell. Thanks for listening, and let us know what you'd like us to cover in the future. We might get around to it. Have a good night, everyone.
さようならさようならさようなら
行くぞどこでも平和のためだ広い世界を駆け巡り目指すは悪い怪獣だでっかい体に可愛い目玉明日も戦う僕らのゴジラ
頑張れ頑張れ僕らのゴジラ頑張れ頑張れ僕らのゴジラ
Keep looking behind you.
Keep looking behind you. Thanks, Will.